One of the most painful and confusing dynamics in relationships with avoidant people is the phenomenon where the person who loves them, who has been supportive and present and invested, suddenly becomes perceived and treated as the enemy. The shift is dramatic and devastating. The same person the avoidant was once drawn to, the person they pursued or at least accepted into their life, the person they might have even expressed care or love for, becomes the target of their criticism, their withdrawal, their cold dismissal, their defensive attacks. The partner who is offering love and support finds themselves cast as threat, as burden, as problem that needs to be managed or escaped. This transformation happens not because of anything the partner did wrong, but because the relationship reached a level of closeness and intimacy that triggered the avoidant person's deepest wounds and most intense defenses. The very love and care the partner is offering, the consistency and presence they're providing, the emotional investment they're demonstrating, all of these become threatening to the avoidant person's defended sense of self. The partner becomes the enemy not because they're harming the avoidant, but because they're offering intimacy that the avoidant system interprets as dangerous, because they're creating conditions where the avoidant person is becoming vulnerable and attached because they represent everything the avoidant person has organized their life to avoid: dependence, need, vulnerability to loss, emotional exposure. The shift from lover to enemy is tragic because it reveals that the avoidant person's wounds are so deep and their defenses so strong that even genuine love offered with good intentions cannot be received without triggering fight or flight responses. The person offering the most care becomes the target of the most hostility. The person providing the most safety becomes perceived as the greatest threat. The person who should be the closest ally becomes treated as the adversary that must be defeated or escaped. Understanding this dynamic, why it happens and how it manifests, illuminates both the depth of avoidant wounding and the impossibility of loving someone out of their defensive patterns without their active commitment to healing work that addresses the core wounds driving this tragic reversal. The shift from safe person to perceived threat. The relationship with an avoidant person typically begins with you being perceived as relatively safe, even attractive and desirable. The avoidant person is drawn to you, engages with you, allows some level of connection to develop. During this initial phase, you're not perceived as threat because the relationship hasn't yet reached the depth that would trigger the avoidant's core defenses. You're still relatively unknown. The relationship is still somewhat surface level. The stakes feel manageable, and the avoidant person can maintain their defensive distance while enjoying the positive aspects of connection. But as the relationship deepens, as time passes and intimacy naturally develops, a shift occurs where you gradually transform in the avoidant person's perception from safe person to threatening presence. This shift is not sudden or consciously chosen. It's gradual psychological process that happens automatically as the relationship crosses certain thresholds of intimacy and importance. The first threshold is when the avoidant person recognizes that they actually care about you, that you've become important to them, that losing you would genuinely hurt. This recognition, which would feel good to most people and would deepen their investment in the relationship, feels dangerous to the avoidant person. Caring about someone means being vulnerable to loss. Importance means dependence. Potential hurt means danger. The moment you matter enough that losing you would be painful is the moment you begin shifting from safe to threatening in their internal experience. The second threshold is when you begin expressing your own needs, expectations, or desires for the relationship's progression. In the beginning, you might have been relatively low demand, simply enjoying the connection without pushing for definition or commitment or greater intimacy. But naturally, as relationships develop, people begin expressing what they need and want. You might express that you want more time together or more emotional sharing or clarity about where things are going or commitment to building something lasting. These expressions are normal and healthy in developing relationships. But to the avoidant person, they They register as demands, as pressure, as attempts to control or trap them. Your needs become threatening because they require the avoidant person to either meet them, which would mean deeper intimacy and commitment they fear, or to disappoint you, which would create conflict and guilt they also fear. The third threshold is when the relationship begins to interfere with the avoidant person's defended independence and autonomy. Perhaps you're taking up more of their time and mental energy. Perhaps they're considering you in their decisions in ways they weren't before. Perhaps their life is becoming somewhat organized around the relationship rather than being purely focused on individual pursuits. Perhaps they're feeling emotions, longing when you're apart, jealousy if they perceive threats to the relationship, anxiety about losing you, that indicate attachment is forming. All of these signs of natural relationship development and attachment formation feel like loss of self to the avoidant person, like they're being consumed or merged in ways that threaten their individual identity. You become the perceived cause of this threatening loss of independence. The shift from safe to threatening is also driven by the avoidant person's projection of their past relationship wounds onto you. In their previous relationships, particularly in childhood with caregivers, closeness might have led to pain, rejection, or harm. Expressing need might have led to those needs being dismissed or punished. Depending on someone might have led to disappointment when that person didn't come through. The avoidant person's nervous system learned that intimacy equals danger, that dependence equals vulnerability to unbearable pain, that needing someone gives them power to hurt you. As you become closer, as the relationship deepens, you become associated with all of these past pains, even though you personally haven't caused them. You become the stand-in for every person who hurt them through intimacy or who failed them when they were vulnerable. The avoidant person begins perceiving your normal relationship behaviors as threatening. Your desire to spend time together becomes perceived as you being clingy or demanding. Your emotional expression becomes you being too intense or too much. Your needs become burdens that prove you're too needy. Your requests for commitment become you trying to trap them. Your vulnerability becomes weakness that makes them feel responsible for your emotions in ways that feel overwhelming. Every healthy, normal aspect of intimate relationship gets reframed through the avoidant lens as something dangerous that justifies their defensive withdrawal. You shift from safe to threatening also, because you've become someone who sees them, who knows them in ways that make them feel exposed and vulnerable. In the beginning, you didn't know them well enough to really see past their defenses, but over time, you've come to understand them, to recognize their patterns, to see their wounds and their fears. This being seen feels unbearably vulnerable to someone who has organized their life around never being fully known, around maintaining image and control, around keeping people at distance where true knowing is impossible. The more you see them, the more threatening you become because you have information and insight that could be used to hurt them if you chose to. The shift is completed when the avoidant person's attachment to you becomes undeniable to them. They cannot lie to themselves anymore that you don't matter, that they could take or leave the relationship, that they're not invested. They've become attached despite all their defenses. They need you in ways they swore they'd never need anyone. They depend on you for happiness or validation or comfort in ways that terrify them. This recognition of their own attachment and vulnerability is the final trigger that completes your transformation from safe person to enemy. You're no longer just someone they're casually dating or spending time with. You're someone they need, and that need is so threatening that you must be pushed away, devalued, kept at distance, or even eliminated from their life entirely to restore their sense of safety and control. How closeness activates the enemy protocol in their mind. Once you've crossed the threshold from safe person to perceived threat, the avoidant person's psychological system activates what can be understood as an enemy protocol, a set of defensive responses designed to neutralize threats, create distance, and protect the self from perceived danger. Understanding how this protocol operates and what specific mechanisms it includes illuminates why the avoidant person suddenly begins treating you with hostility, criticism, coldness, or dismissal that seems completely disproportionate to anything you've actually done. The enemy protocol begins with the avoidant person's attention, shifting from your positive qualities to your flaws and incompatibilities. In the beginning of the relationship, they noticed and appreciated what they liked about you, your humor, your intelligence, your attractiveness, your interests that aligned with theirs, your way of understanding them. But once you become threatening through closeness, their attention shifts to focus almost exclusively on what they perceive as your flaws. Suddenly, they're noticing how you talk too much, or how your laugh annoys them, or how your political views differ from theirs, or how you're not as ambitious as they thought, or how you need too much reassurance. These perceived flaws might have always existed, but they weren't the focus of attention when you were safe. Now that you're threatening, the avoidant mind searches for and magnifies flaws as justification for creating distance or ending things. This flaw finding and magnification is not conscious manipulation. It's automatic defensive process where the avoidant person's mind is trying to build case for why you're not right for them, why the relationship shouldn't continue, why they need to create distance. By focusing on your flaws, they're trying to make pushing you away feel justified rather than like they're running from intimacy. They're trying to convince themselves that the problem is you and your inadequacies, rather than their own fear and inability to handle closeness. This process is called devaluation in attachment literature, and it's particularly cruel because the person being devalued has typically done nothing to deserve this sudden shift in how they're perceived. The enemy protocol includes the avoidant person withdrawing emotionally and physically in ways that feel punishing. They become less available, less responsive, less present, even when physically there. They stop initiating contact or drastically reduce it. They cancel plans or become unreliable. They seem distant or cold in ways that create anxiety and confusion in their partner. This withdrawal serves multiple functions. It creates the physical and emotional distance they need to feel less threatened. It punishes you for having gotten too close, and it tests whether you'll pursue them or whether you'll accept the distance. The withdrawal is often unconscious communication that says you've gotten too close and I need you to back off, and I'm going to make things uncomfortable enough that you either do back off or you leave entirely. The enemy protocol includes critical and judgmental communication that attacks the partner's character, needs, or behaviors. The avoidant person might criticize you for being too emotional when you express feelings. They might judge you for being needy when you express normal relationship needs. They might attack your choices or your personality in ways that feel designed to hurt or diminish you. This criticism serves to create distance through making you feel bad about yourself and through justifying the avoidant person's withdrawal by framing you as having problems that make the relationship difficult. The criticism also serves defensive function of making you the problem rather than their intimacy avoidance being the problem. The enemy protocol includes the avoidant person creating conflict or manufacturing crises that justify distance. They might pick fights over minor issues, turning small disagreements into major conflicts that allow them to storm off or create space. They might bring up old issues that were supposedly resolved, reopening wounds as excuse for being upset and withdrawn. They might even create situations designed to make you angry or upset, giving them justification for framing you as too dramatic or too difficult. These manufactured conflicts are not about the content of the fights, but about creating enough discord that distance feels necessary and justified rather than like defensive avoidance. The enemy protocol includes stonewalling and refusal to engage when you try to address problems or repair connection. When you attempt to discuss what's happening, to understand their withdrawal, to work through conflicts, the avoidant person shuts down completely. They won't engage in the conversation, won't answer questions, or will answer minimally and defensively, won't take any responsibility for the problems. This stonewalling communicates that you're not worth engaging with, that the issues aren't worth discussing, that they're unwilling to do the work of repair. The stonewalling creates immense frustration and often pushes partners into more intense attempts to connect or to be heard, which then gives the avoidant more ammunition to label the partner as too much or too demanding. The enemy protocol includes the avoidant person establishing or enforcing rigid boundaries that feel more like walls than like healthy limits. They might suddenly need much more alone time, or they might insist on maintaining completely separate spaces or social lives, or they might refuse to discuss certain topics or feelings. These boundaries are presented as healthy self-care, but they're actually defensive fortification designed to keep you at distance where you can't threaten them with intimacy. The boundaries are one-directional, protecting the avoidant person's comfort while ignoring or dismissing your needs for connection and emotional availability. The enemy protocol includes triangulation, where the avoidant person brings other people or situations into the dynamic as a way of diluting the intimacy or creating buffer between themselves and you. They might become suddenly very focused on work or hobbies that exclude you. They might start spending more time with friends or family than with you. They might even reference or maintain contact with ex-partners in ways that create insecurity. This triangulation serves to make you feel less important, less central, less secure, which creates distance and keeps the avoidant person from being too focused on or dependent on just you for companionship or emotional support. The psychological mechanisms that turn love into war. The transformation of your role from lover to enemy is not just about the avoidant person's actions, but about the underlying psychological mechanisms that drive these actions and that literally restructure how they perceive you and the relationship. Understanding these mechanisms reveals why the shift is so dramatic and why it feels like the person you loved has become someone completely different, almost unrecognizable from the person who was initially attracted to you. The primary psychological mechanism is the avoidant person's core belief that intimacy equals danger, and this belief automatically codes you as enemy once intimacy reaches threatening levels. This belief was formed in childhood through experiences where closeness led to pain, where expressing need led to rejection, where depending on others led to disappointment or harm. The belief is not conscious thought that the avoidant person is aware of and chooses. It's implicit schema, a deeply embedded pattern in their nervous system and cognitive processing that operates automatically below conscious awareness. When intimacy reaches certain threshold, this schema activates and begins processing you through threat detection system rather than through the bonding system. You're no longer processed as potential source of safety and connection. You're processed as danger that must be managed or eliminated. The second mechanism is catastrophic thinking about what will happen if the intimacy continues or if they allow themselves to remain vulnerable with you. The avoidant person's mind generates worst-case scenarios about the relationship. You'll abandon them once you truly know them. You'll use their vulnerability against them. You'll become controlling or abusive. You'll suffocate them until they lose themselves completely. You'll inevitably hurt them in unbearable ways. These catastrophic predictions feel real and imminent to the avoidant person, even though they're based on past experiences and fears rather than on your actual behavior. The catastrophic thinking drives the enemy protocol because you're being treated as though you're definitely going to do these terrible things, as though you're already doing them, even though the only evidence is the avoidant person's own projections and fears. The third mechanism is the avoidant person's need to preserve their defended identity as independent, self-sufficient person who doesn't need anyone. As the relationship deepens and attachment forms, this identity is threatened by the reality that they do need you. They do depend on you in some ways. They are affected by your presence or absence. This threat to their core identity creates intense psychological discomfort that must be resolved. The resolution they choose is to push you away so they can restore their sense of being independent and complete alone. But pushing you away requires justification. So you must become the enemy, the person who was threatening their independence, the person who was trying to make them dependent, or who was preventing them from being their true self. You become the enemy not because of who you are, but because of what your presence was forcing them to recognize about themselves. The fourth mechanism is splitting, a defense mechanism where the avoidant person cannot hold nuanced view of you as person with both positive and negative qualities, with both strengths and limitations. In the beginning, you might have been idealized, seen as mostly or entirely positive. But once you become threatening, the avoidant person splits you into all bad category, suddenly seeing you as mostly or entirely negative, full of flaws and inadequacies, wrong for them in fundamental ways. This splitting makes it easier to push you away and to justify the withdrawal and the poor treatment, because the avoidant person has difficulty maintaining awareness of your positive qualities while they're in the process of defending against the threat you represent. The fifth mechanism is projection, where the avoidant person attributes their own unacceptable feelings, needs, or characteristics onto you. The avoidant person might be feeling needy, but they project this neediness onto you, seeing you as the needy one. They might be feeling angry about the relationship situation, but they project this anger onto you, perceiving you as angry or difficult. They might be feeling dependent, but they project this dependence onto you, seeing you as too dependent on them. This projection serves to keep their self-image intact while making you the problem. It also makes you the enemy because you're now perceived as having all these negative qualities that the avoidant person cannot accept in themselves. The sixth mechanism is the avoidant person's inability to take responsibility for their role in relationship problems, combined with their need to make someone responsible. When the relationship becomes uncomfortable due to their intimacy, anxiety, and their defensive withdrawal, someone must be blamed for this discomfort. Since the avoidant person cannot acknowledge that their own patterns are creating the problems, you must be the cause. You must be the one making things difficult. You must be the one who is too demanding or too emotional or incompatible. This externalization of blame makes you the enemy, the source of problems, the obstacle to their peace and happiness. The seventh mechanism is the avoidant person's selective attention and memory that reinforces their current negative view of you. Once you've become threatening and the enemy protocol is activated, the avoidant person's attention and memory systems become biased toward noticing and remembering negative things about you and about the relationship while filtering out or minimizing positive experiences. They remember fights and disappointments, but forget the good times. They notice your flaws, but no longer see your strengths. They recall moments when you were needy or emotional, but don't remember the many times you were understanding and gave them space. This selective processing builds increasingly negative picture of you that justifies continued defensive distance and that makes reconciliation or positive reframing difficult because the avoidant person literally cannot access balanced view of you while they're in this defensive state. Why they attack the person they need most. The ultimate tragic irony of the avoidant person's transformation of lover into enemy is that the person they're attacking, the person they're treating as threat, is often the person they actually need most, the person who could provide the very safety, acceptance, and love that their wounded self longs for underneath all the defenses. Understanding why they attack precisely the person who could help them most reveals the depth of their wounding and the cruel paradox at the heart of avoidant attachment. The avoidant person attacks the person they need most because that need itself is what feels most threatening. Needing someone means depending on them, which means giving them power to hurt you. Needing someone means accepting that you're not completely self-sufficient, which threatens the defended identity as independent person who doesn't need anyone. Needing someone means becoming vulnerable to loss if that person leaves or disappoints you. All of these implications of need feel dangerous to someone whose early experiences taught them that need leads to pain. So the person they need most becomes the person they must attack and push away to prevent the catastrophic outcome they fear will inevitably follow from allowing themselves to need. The attack is also driven by the avoidant person's shame about needing. They've internalized belief that need is weakness, that requiring support or comfort or love from others is shameful inadequacy that reveals they're broken or insufficient. When they recognize their own need for you, when they catch themselves depending on you or looking forward to seeing you or being affected by your absence, they experience intense shame. This shame is intolerable and must be managed. And the management strategy they employ is to attack you for making them need you, for forcing dependence upon them, for being the cause of their shameful need. The attack externalizes the shame, making you the problem rather than having to sit with their own shame about being human and having attachment needs. The person they need most is also the person who sees them most clearly, who has gotten past their defenses enough to witness their vulnerability and their wounds. This being seen is exactly what the avoidant person needs for healing, someone who can see them fully and still accept them. But it's also what they fear most because being seen means being exposed, means having your defensive mask removed, means someone knowing the parts of you that you believe are unacceptable. The attack on the person who sees them is an attempt to make that person stop seeing, to reestablish the distance and the defenses that prevent being known. It's also sometimes revenge for the discomfort of being seen, punishing you for having gotten close enough to witness what they wanted to keep hidden. The avoidant person attacks the person they need most because that person's presence and love activates the pain of what they didn't receive in childhood. When you love them, when you show up consistently, when you offer the care and acceptance that their younger self needed and didn't get, it highlights the absence of that care in their formative years. This highlighting is painful because it connects them to the grief and loss they've been avoiding through their defenses. Rather than allowing themselves to feel this grief and to grieve what they didn't receive, they attack you for making them feel this pain, for activating wounds they wanted to remain dormant. You become the enemy for bringing them into contact with their own pain. They attack the person they need most because allowing themselves to receive what you're offering would require dismantling defenses that feel necessary for survival. The avoidant person's defensive structure was built to protect them from further hurt, and it's been maintained through years of reinforcement. To receive your love and care would require lowering these defenses, which would feel like removing protective armor while standing in battlefield. The vulnerability required to truly receive love feels like life or death risk to someone whose nervous system learned that vulnerability leads to unbearable pain. So they attack you to keep you at distance where they don't have to face the terror of lowering their defenses and accepting what you're offering.